I used to believe that trust was something you built once and kept forever. If someone had asked me 5 years ago who I trusted the most, I wouldn't have hesitated. The answer would have been my girlfriend Claire and my best friend Ethan. They had been the two constants in my life since college. Looking back now, I realize that certainty can sometimes be the biggest blind spot. At 27, I had what most people would call a comfortable life. I worked as a digital marketing specialist for a growing software company in Chicago. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough for me to rent a decent apartment near the river, save money every month, and still enjoy weekends exploring the city. Claire and I had been together for almost 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party during our senior year of college. She was funny without trying too hard, loved old bookstores, and had a habit of humming while cooking. I remember thinking she made ordinary moments feel special. After graduation, we moved to Chicago together, believing we were starting the next chapter of our lives. Ethan had been my best friend since freshman orientation. We survived impossible professors, late-night study sessions, and years of cheap takeout while trying to figure out adulthood. Even after college, we stayed close. He lived only 15 minutes away, and it wasn't unusual for him to stop by on Friday evenings with pizza and plans for the weekend. People joked that he was practically family. I agreed. That was why I never questioned anything. The first signs were so small they barely registered. Claire started working later than usual. Her company had landed a major client, and everyone was expected to put in extra hours. It sounded believable. Ethan had recently joined a new consulting firm. He often canceled plans, apologizing that deadlines were piling up. Life gets busy. That's what I kept telling myself. One Thursday, I surprised Claire by leaving work early with flowers and ingredients to cook her favorite pasta. I imagined we'd eat dinner together and watch one of those old detective movies she loved. Stoned? When I unlocked the apartment, the place was empty. Her text arrived a few minutes later. Still at the office. Big presentation tomorrow. Don't wait for me. I smiled, put the flowers in water, and cooked anyway. She didn't come home until nearly 11. She looked exhausted, kissed my forehead, and thanked me for dinner before going straight to bed. Nothing seemed unusual, at least not then. A week later, Ethan invited me to watch a baseball game on Saturday afternoon. I happily agreed. An hour before we were supposed to meet, he called. Something came up with work. Rain check? No problem, I replied. Since my afternoon was suddenly free, I decided to surprise Claire by bringing lunch to her office. The receptionist looked confused when I mentioned Claire's name. I'm sorry, she said politely. Claire took today off. I stared at her. Are you sure? She checked the schedule again. Positive. I forced a smile, thanked her, and walked back outside. Maybe she'd forgotten to tell me. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. By the time I got home, she'd already texted. Long day, might stay late again. I read the message 3 times, then I deleted the lunch order from my phone without replying. That evening she returned carrying a shopping bag from a clothing store downtown. I thought you were working. She looked at me for half a second before answering. My boss let us leave early after the presentation. It was a smooth answer. Too smooth. Still, I nodded and let it go. I wanted to believe her. People don't realize how powerful hope can be. When you love someone, your mind works overtime to protect the relationship. Every inconsistency gets an explanation. Every strange moment becomes a misunderstanding. I ignored my instincts because accepting the alternative felt impossible. Over the next month, little things continued to change. Claire became protective of her phone. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter while cooking. Now it never left her pocket. If it buzzed, she'd glance at the screen and turn it face down. At dinner, she smiled less. When I talked about our future, buying a house, taking a trip to California, maybe getting engaged the following year, she answered with short sentences before changing the subject. Ethan changed too. Whenever I invited him over, he suddenly had other plans. When we did meet, he seemed distracted. He laughed at the wrong moments and checked his phone constantly. One Friday evening, the 3 of us met for dinner like old times. For a while, everything felt normal. We talked about work, sports, and vacation ideas. Then Claire accidentally knocked her fork onto the floor. As she bent down to pick it up, Ethan reached for his glass of water at exactly the same moment. Their hands brushed. Neither of them noticed. I did. What caught my attention wasn't the touch. It was the look they exchanged afterward. A quick glance. Almost nervous. Gone in less than a second. Most people would have forgotten it immediately. I couldn't. That night, sleep refused to come. I replayed the evening over and over, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The next morning, Claire announced she was meeting her friend Megan for brunch. Tell her I said hi, I replied. Of course. About an hour later, I stopped at a neighborhood coffee shop before heading to the gym. As I waited for my order, I happened to look across the street. A dark SUV pulled into a parking spot. Ethan stepped out. A few seconds later, Claire climbed out of the passenger seat. They weren't holding hands, they weren't hugging. They simply smiled at each other before walking into a cafe together. My coffee was ready. I never picked it up. I stood frozen behind the window, trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Megan was already inside. Maybe they had run into each other by coincidence. Maybe. For the first time since all of this began, the word maybe didn't feel convincing anymore. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a truth I wasn't ready to face. I stayed in my car across the street for nearly 20 minutes. I kept telling myself to leave. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Ethan was only dropping Claire off. Maybe Megan was already inside the cafe. Maybe I was letting a few strange coincidences get the better of me. But neither of them came back out. Eventually, I crossed the street and stood outside the cafe window. I wasn't trying to spy on them. I was looking for proof that my imagination had been wrong. Instead, I saw them sitting at a corner table. They weren't behaving like coworkers or casual friends. They leaned toward each other, smiling in a way that suggested complete comfort. Ethan said something that made Claire laugh so hard she reached across the table and lightly touched his arm. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No kiss, no embrace, just a level of familiarity I had never noticed before. I walked away before either of them saw me. The drive home was a blur. I wanted to call someone, my brother, my parents, anyone, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Somehow, speaking my suspicions would make them real. That evening, Claire came home carrying a bakery box. I brought your favorite cheesecake, she said with a smile. Normally, I would have hugged her. Instead, I searched her face for any sign of guilt. She looked completely calm. How was brunch with Megan? I asked. It was nice. We talked for hours. She answered so naturally that I almost questioned my own memory. I wanted to tell her I had seen everything. But I wasn't ready. If I was wrong, I would destroy our relationship over nothing. If I was right, I wasn't sure I could handle hearing the answer. Over the next 2 weeks, I stopped ignoring the details. Claire started placing her phone face down every time she entered the room. Ethan rarely called anymore. When he did, our conversations lasted only a few minutes before he claimed he had another meeting. For the first time in years, the three of us never seemed to be in the same place. It felt intentional. One Friday, Claire announced she had to attend a weekend leadership workshop with coworkers. She packed an overnight bag and left early Saturday morning. "I'll be back Sunday evening," she said before kissing my cheek. An hour later, Ethan texted me. "Sorry, man. Business trip to Milwaukee. Talk next week." I stared at the message. Something inside me finally snapped. I wasn't interested in spying. I simply wanted the truth. That afternoon, I called Claire's office and asked to speak with one of her teammates. After a brief conversation, the woman casually mentioned that there was no leadership workshop that weekend. My heart sank. Next, I called Ethan's office. The receptionist cheerfully informed me that he wasn't traveling. He had taken personal leave. For several minutes, I sat in complete silence. Every excuse, every canceled plan, every late-night meeting, every coincidence. They suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I didn't chase them. I didn't follow them. I didn't hire a private investigator. The lies themselves had become enough. Sunday evening, Claire returned home looking relaxed instead of exhausted. She placed her overnight bag near the bedroom door. "How was the workshop?" I asked quietly. "Busy," she replied. "I'm glad it's over." I looked directly into her eyes. There wasn't a workshop. The color drained from her face. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sat down on the couch. "I can explain." Those 4 words somehow hurt more than anything else. Explain. Not deny. Not ask what I meant. Just explain. I sat across from her. "When did it start?" She looked down at the floor. "It wasn't supposed to happen." "That's not an answer." She wiped away a tear. "A few months ago." The room suddenly felt much smaller. "A few months," I repeated. She nodded. She told me it began after the two of them spent extra time together planning a surprise anniversary dinner for us. They had started texting more often. Friendly conversations slowly became emotional ones. Then one evening they crossed a line. Instead of ending it, they convinced themselves they had feelings for each other. Listening to her was like watching someone slowly erase 4 years of memories. Every vacation, every birthday, every promise. They all felt different now. I asked the question I had been avoiding. "Does Ethan love you?" She hesitated. "I think so." "And you?" She closed her eyes. "I don't know anymore." That answer was enough. I quietly stood up and walked into the bedroom. She followed me. "Please don't leave." I opened the closet and began placing clothes into a duffel bag. "Please," she repeated. "You had months to think about us." She started crying. "I never wanted to hurt you." I zipped the bag shut. "But you did." I walked out without another word. For the next several weeks, I stayed with my older brother. Some mornings I woke up angry. Other mornings I simply felt empty. Friends began calling after hearing rumors about the breakup. Most didn't know the real reason. A few eventually found out. Some stopped talking to Ethan completely. Others tried staying neutral. I didn't ask anyone to choose sides. I was too busy trying to rebuild my own life. About a month later, Ethan finally called. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. His voice sounded nervous. "I owe you an apology. You owed me honesty." "I know." "No," I replied quietly. "You knew. You just chose differently." He sighed. "We never planned for this." I laughed bitterly. People don't accidentally lie for months. Silence filled the line. "I hope someday you can forgive me. I hope someday you understand what trust actually means." I ended the call. That conversation gave me no satisfaction. Some betrayals don't end with dramatic arguments. Sometimes they end with two people realizing they'll never be part of each other's lives again. Over the following year, I poured every ounce of energy into work. I accepted projects no one else wanted. I stayed late. I learned new skills. Eventually, my company offered me a promotion, but it required moving to Seattle. A year earlier, I would have turned it down without hesitation. Now there was nothing left keeping me in Chicago. The apartment held too many memories. The coffee shops, the parks. Even the grocery store reminded me of a life that no longer existed. So I accepted. As my plane lifted off from Chicago, I looked out the window one last time. I wasn't leaving because I had lost everything. I was leaving because I finally understood that healing sometimes begins by giving yourself permission to start over somewhere new. I had no idea that the biggest surprise of my life was still waiting for me, and it would arrive in the form of an elegant wedding invitation nearly 2 years later. Seattle gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The first few months were exactly what I needed. My new job was challenging, my coworkers were welcoming, and nobody knew anything about my past. I wasn't the guy whose girlfriend left him for his best friend. I was simply Daniel, the newest member of the marketing team. Slowly, life settled into a rhythm. I explored hiking trails on weekends, discovered local coffee shops, and spent evenings reading or calling my family. The memories of Claire and Ethan didn't disappear overnight, but they stopped controlling my days. Therapy helped too. One session, my therapist asked me a question that stayed with me. If they apologized tomorrow, what would change? I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I answered, nothing. She smiled gently. Then maybe you're closer to healing than you think. For the first time, I realized healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about no longer needing answers from people who had already given me all the answers I needed through their actions. Almost 2 years passed. One Tuesday evening, I returned home after work and noticed a thick envelope in my mailbox. It was cream-colored with elegant gold lettering. At first I assumed it was a business invitation. Then I saw the names. Claire Thompson and Ethan Brooks request the pleasure of your presence. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it felt unreal. Out of everyone they could invite, they had chosen me. I carried the envelope upstairs, placed it on my kitchen counter, and stared at it for several minutes. Inside was a beautifully designed invitation, hotel information, and a handwritten note. "We know this may be uncomfortable, but we'd love for you to come." We hope enough time has passed for all of us to move forward. I folded the note and placed everything back into the envelope. Move forward. Interesting choice of words. Moving forward had required rebuilding my life from the ground up. Still, I wasn't angry. I simply had no reason to attend. A week later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I almost ignored it. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. Hey, he said awkwardly. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. There was an uncomfortable silence. I wanted to make sure you received the invitation. I did. I know things ended badly. They did. But Claire and I thought, maybe enough time has passed. I looked out my apartment window at the Seattle skyline. You don't need my approval to get married. That's not what I mean. What do you mean? He hesitated. I guess I wanted us to be okay. I couldn't help but smile. Ethan, some friendships end because people grow apart. Ours ended because you knowingly betrayed me. Those aren't the same thing. He didn't argue. I understand. I hope your wedding goes well. I meant it. Not because I cared about their relationship, because I cared even less about holding on to resentment. After hanging up, I declined the invitation and never thought about it again. Or so I believed. 3 months later, I received a call from my old college friend Marcus. You sitting down? He asked. Why? The wedding never happened. I leaned back in my chair. What happened? Marcus sighed. It's a mess. About 6 weeks before the ceremony, Claire had borrowed Ethan's laptop to print seating charts. While searching for the document, a message notification appeared on the screen. Normally, she would have ignored it. Instead, the preview displayed a sentence impossible to misunderstand. I can't wait until your fiancé leaves for her work trip again. Claire opened the conversation. Months of messages filled the screen. Photos, plans, promises. It wasn't just emotional. Ethan had been secretly dating a coworker for nearly 7 months. The irony was heartbreaking. The man who helped destroy one relationship through dishonesty had quietly repeated the same pattern. Claire confronted him that night. At first, he denied everything. Then he admitted the truth. The engagement ended before sunrise. Wedding vendors kept non-refundable deposits. Family members who had already booked flights demanded explanations. Friends chose sides. Within days, what had looked like a perfect relationship completely collapsed. Marcus paused before saying something else. You know what's strange? What? Claire apparently told several people. Now I finally understand what Daniel went through. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for a long time. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. Not happiness, not revenge, just quiet acceptance. Life had taken its own course. Several months later, I was waiting for a flight to Denver when I heard someone say my name. I turned around. Claire. She looked older than I remembered, not because of age, but because regret has a way of changing people. She smiled nervously. I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk. I have a few minutes. We found seats near the terminal windows. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I heard you're doing well. I am. I'm glad. She looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. When everything happened with Ethan, I kept remembering every lie I told you. I listened quietly. I spent years convincing myself our relationship ended because we'd grown apart. She shook her head. That wasn't true. It ended because I stopped respecting someone who trusted me. There were tears in her eyes now. I'm sorry. This time the apology felt different. It wasn't asking to erase the past. It wasn't asking for another chance. It was simply acknowledging the damage she'd caused. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. I don't expect forgiveness. I know, she nodded. I just didn't want the last thing I ever said to you to be another lie. Her boarding group was called. She stood, smiled sadly, and walked toward the gate. That was the last time I ever saw her. A year later, my own life looked completely different. During a community volunteer project, I met a woman named Olivia. She was kind, patient, and refreshingly honest. We became friends first. Neither of us rushed anything. Trust wasn't built through promises. It was built through consistency, showing up, keeping our word, being honest even when the truth was uncomfortable. 2 years later, we bought our first home together. While unpacking old boxes, I found the unopened wedding invitation Claire and Ethan had sent years earlier. Olivia picked it up. What's this? I smiled. A reminder. Of what? But sometimes the worst day of your life quietly redirects you toward a better one. She slipped her hand into mine. What are you going to do with it? I looked at the envelope one last time. Years earlier, it would have filled me with anger. Now it was nothing more than paper. I dropped it into the recycling bin. Not because I hated them, because I no longer needed a reminder of people who were no longer part of my story. Looking back now, I don't believe karma is some mysterious force that always arrives with dramatic timing. Sometimes karma is simply living with the consequences of your own choices. Claire lost the relationship she believed was worth sacrificing everything for. Ethan discovered that dishonesty doesn't become less destructive just because you're on the other side of it. And I learned something far more valuable than revenge. I learned that peace isn't found by waiting for the people who hurt you to suffer. It's found by building a life so meaningful that their choices no longer define your future. If someone asked whether I'd go back and change what happened, my answer would still be no. Not because betrayal was a gift. It wasn't. It hurt more than I thought possible. But it also forced me to leave a life that was built on illusions and create one rooted in honesty, self-respect, and genuine happiness. Sometimes the chapter that feels like the end of your story is quietly introducing you to the life you were always meant to live. I just had to turn the page to find it.